Hello and welcome. I'm Nadira Tudor and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. Putin warns the West he could strike back against those who supplied weapons to Ukraine, while Zelenskyy says the world must respond. Meanwhile, the UK and France join forces, pledging to relentlessly support Ukraine against Russia. In the United States, a New York judge officially postpones the hush money sentencing of Donald Trump in Manhattan. And a sixth foreign tourist and second Australian teenager dies of suspected methanol poisoning in Laos as hostel staff are questioned. The world must respond after Russia claims to have fired a new type of missile, says Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelenskyy. He's accused Russia's President Putin of a clear and severe escalation as the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro was hit. Putin says this is a reaction to Ukraine using US and UK-supplied long-range missiles on Russian soil and warns that his forces could attack Western countries. For more on this, I'm joined from Kyiv by our correspondent, Megumi Lin. Megumi, we really are seeing daily escalations at the moment with this conflict, very much a tit-for-tat approach from both sides. What's the latest from Ukraine's President Zelenskyy?
That's right. Things have really escalated this week between Russia and Ukraine. The latest from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is that he has called for a strong response from world leaders to condemn what he called a, quote, clear and severe escalation of the war by Russia. He said, quote, the use of the ballistic missile against Ukraine is yet more proof that Russia has no interest in peace. Now, he's saying this in response to that recent attack on Thursday against the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro with the use of the Russian experimental intermediate range ballistic missile. Now, we have, however, seen also responses coming from world leaders today. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying that Russia's use of this new missile was, quote, a terrible escalation, and also from Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk saying that he sees a real risk of a global conflict breaking out. He said, quote, we feel that the unknown is approaching. But the latest that has come out from Ukraine just about an hour ago is that the Ukrainian military intelligence has released the first assessment of the weapon that was used against the city of Dnipro on Thursday. They're saying that this missile that was used reached a top speed of more than 13,000 kilometers per hour, and it took 15 minutes to reach its target from its launch site, which was located about 1,200 kilometers away in Russia's Astrakhan region. Now, they're saying that this missile was equipped with 6 warheads, each also equipped with 6 sub-munitions.
That is quite a statistic, isn't it, Megumi? 14,000 kilometers per hour in 15 minutes. Let's look at the other side. The latest from Russia's President Putin. What's his position?
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin has also called the use of Ukraine's use of the American-supplied ATACMS missiles and the British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles against Russia's Kursk and Bryansk region an escalation in the war. He's accused the West of escalating towards the war towards a global conflict. And again, he's blamed Ukraine's use of these missiles, Western-supplied missiles, for this escalation. He said that Russia's use of this new experimental missile was in response to these strikes carried out by Ukraine this week. And he's also warned that more attacks could follow. He said that this new missile can fly at the speed of 10 times the speed of sound, and that no air defense systems can intercept these missiles. Now, he's saying that Russia will warn civilians beforehand, before these strikes would take place. But he's also, again, sending a strong message to the West that Russia is also willing to use weapons against countries that have aided Ukraine or will aid Ukraine by sending arms that Ukraine will then use to strike at targets inside Russia. So again, we're seeing, again, as you said, an escalation in the war between Russia and Ukraine this week.
Megumi Lim in Kyiv, thank you for the update. Meanwhile, France has come forward with their position with regards to the Ukraine-Russia war. The French Foreign Minister is visiting London for talks and has pledged to relentlessly support Ukraine against Russia. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin, he issued this stark warning to the West.
As a result of the escalation, the United States and their NATO allies said that they give their permission to use long-range weapons against targets inside Russia. Experts know fully well, and the Russian side has underscored this time and again, that using such weapons without the direct involvement of military operators from manufacturing countries is impossible. I repeat, the use of such weapons cannot change the course of the special military operation. Our military is successfully advancing along the entire line of contact, and all the objectives that we set before ourselves will be met.
For more on this, I'm joined from London by our correspondent, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, this trip by the French Foreign Minister is quite significant, isn't it?
Significant, certainly, in both sides presenting it that way, absolutely. Heading into the talks, they wrote a joint article in one of the British newspapers saying that they would fight relentlessly against the Russian invasion of Ukraine when it comes to supporting the Ukrainians, but also talking in very strong terms about the position on Russia, saying that they see the involvement in that conflict, the allegations of involvement in that conflict by countries such as North Korea and Iran when it comes to troops and weapons supplies as well. They called that the Putinization of global architecture and said that that was something that the UK and France would work together to stand against. The location for the talks as well, an attempt by the British to mark the end of the Second World War too, given the armistice days marking that we've seen recently at this time of year. It took place just opposite Carlton Gardens in central London, which was General de Gaulle's base during the occupation of Paris in World War II. So the symbolism was certainly strong as well during these discussions. A major focus on Ukraine, but also talking about the crisis in the Middle East. But we're also told that the two foreign ministers focused on other issues of cooperation too, from climate to trade to artificial intelligence and more besides. So certainly both sides absolutely of the view that these were significant talks here in London.
You've mentioned a number of issues that they've been talking about and the key areas, obviously, that they were going to discuss. But what about the key areas with regards to Russia-Ukraine?
In the difficulties we've seen in recent days with all of the tensions following the decision to allow the Ukrainians to use Storm Shadow missiles to strike deeper inside Russia, you expect that that would have been part of the discussions behind closed doors, but it remains something that European leaders are not keen to talk about, particularly in public. And so the support for Ukraine is key to these discussions. And this is really another example of the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer attempting to show that he can reset or rebuild relations with European capitals, but it's also part of attempts by European capitals more widely to show that they are united when it comes to support for Ukraine. And again, that flows from the concern here in Europe that when US President-elect Donald Trump gets back into the White House, that if American support for Kyiv tapers away, European capitals like London and Paris want to show that they remain united united and remain supportive of Ukraine's efforts to, in the words of Kiev, win the war against Vladimir Putin. That looks a difficult prospect at the moment, given the state on the battlefield inside Ukraine. But as I say, European capitals, given what is unfolding across the Atlantic and the uncertainty around what the Trump administration might do when it comes to Kiev, France and the UK using meetings like this to show that their support for the Ukrainians remains unwavering.
Ollie, what's been the reaction from the UK and France with regards to the International Criminal Court, the ICC's decision? Are the two countries on the same page?
Sort of, in the sense that the two countries are expressing support for the principles of the ICC. There's been some confusion here in the UK, though, about the government's position, which has had to be somewhat clarified. When that announcement was initially made by the ICC, the initial UK government response was to say that it supports the independence of the International Criminal Court. That was interpreted by some as a backing for the idea that if Benjamin Netanyahu were to travel to the UK, that the UK government would attempt to arrest him. But that was clouded somewhat earlier in the day when the Home Secretary, the Interior Minister, Yvette Cooper, was questioned about this topic and asked what would happen if Benjamin Netanyahu came to Britain. Would the UK be obliged to arrest him? She didn't sound certain about the exact response. She referred to things like process and said that she might not be the minister that would be involved in that decision-making process. And so that in turn led to journalists asking Downing Street here in London today what exactly the position was. And Downing Street wouldn't get into too many specifics and didn't want to talk about what it called hypotheticals, but said that yes, the UK government would follow its international obligations. Well, what flows from that is that the UK would be obliged under international law and its commitment to the ICC to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu were he to travel to the UK. That said, there's no current prospect of such a visit taking place. And the other thing that Downing Street was making clear today is that it says that Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, will absolutely continue to talk to Benjamin Netanyahu about the crisis in the Middle East and will continue to engage what the UK government called with its allies. And so a difficult path to tread for the UK on this one, but we have had that clarification through the day that the UK would follow its obligations when it comes to the ICC. And as I say, what flows from that is that if Benjamin Netanyahu were to venture to Britain under the current state of play, the UK would be obliged to arrest him under that ICC arrest warrant.
Ollie Barrett in London, thank you. Let's have a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. The car park at Iceland's Blue Lagoon has become engulfed in lava after the volcano nearby erupted for the 7th time in the last year. People staying at nearby hotels and homes were evacuated, but there's no threat to air travel in the region. An American medic has become the first recipient of the world's first fully robotic double lung. Cheryl Mercart lived with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease for the last 10 years. She'll be released from a hospital in New York in the coming days. It's thought the technology will mean minimal invasive surgery, reduce hospital stays and speed up recovery. And pop singer Katy Perry has successfully appealed a trademark decision after she was sued by an Australian designer who shares the same birth name. Judges overturned a court decision earlier today that previously favoured the fashion designer. The court said singer Perry had been using her name before the Australian started her business and had earned an international reputation in entertainment. The International Criminal Court's decision to issue arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has sent shockwaves around the world and met with condemnation by Israel and some of its staunchest allies. The court alleges both Netanyahu and Gallant have committed war crimes, including the use of starvation as a weapon of war and indiscriminate targeting of a civilian population. For more on this, I'm joined from London by Eylon Levy, former spokesman for the State of Israel and currently host of the Israel State of a Nation podcast. Welcome to the programme, Eylon.
Hello, good to join you.
Eylon, do you think the International Criminal Court has made the right decision by issuing the arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant?
No, the International Criminal Court has issued these arrest warrants after distorting the facts and twisting the law. I think the people of Gaza know better than the judges at the ICC that the source of their misery is Hamas. They know that this war started because Hamas launched war on October 7th with the October 7th massacre. They know that there has been tremendous civilian suffering because Hamas hides weapons and fighters in their schools, in their mosques, in their homes, even under UN facilities. They know that there is no starvation because they have seen the over 1 million tons of aid that have entered Gaza aboard nearly 60,000 trucks. And they know that Israel isn't targeting them because Israel keeps asking them to move to safety out of harm's way, away from places where Hamas is trying to use them as human shields and indeed human sacrifices. That's why we see that support for Hamas in Gaza has plummeted to 3%. Because the people of Gaza understand that the source of their suffering is the Hamas regime that is determined to use them as martyrs and as human cannon fodder, and could end this war tomorrow by releasing the hostages and surrendering.
Eylon, I do have to go back to my original question, though. So what the ICC have said is that they've accused them of using starvation as a weapon of war and indiscriminate targeting of a civilian population. So they are accusing Netanyahu of that. Do you agree with that? Because they're looking at the individual rather than Hamas or the IDF or the Israeli management seniors or whatever. So could you answer that question?
As I said, the request for the arrest warrants, every single line in that document was based on falsehoods. They allege, for example, starvation. That is impossible to reconcile with the fact that over 1 million tons of aid have entered Gaza since Hamas started this war, with the fact that Israel has opened 5 new crossings that didn't exist when Hamas launched this war, with the fact that inside Gaza right now there are hundreds of aid trucks Israel has let into Gaza and the UN hasn't collected. In fact, the UN stopped counting alleged deaths by starvation a long time ago because there is no evidence of deaths by starvation. There are some very sad cases of people who had pre-existing medical conditions. We saw those on television. But the reason that we haven't seen any starvation is that aid continues to flow into Gaza. And that's because Israel's policy is to allow the international community to bring in as much aid as it wants. And if you have a look at the request for arrest warrants, you'll see just how farcical it is. The prosecutor accuses Israel of closing the Rafah border crossing on the 8th of October. The Rafah border crossing is a crossing between Egypt and Gaza. Israel didn't close it on October 8th. He accuses Israel of closing the Erez crossing to goods. Again, the Erez crossing was a pedestrian crossing that Hamas destroyed when it massacred and abducted the staff on October 7th. So when you go through the allegations one by one, it is clear the arrest warrant could only be requested on the base of falsehoods. And that is why it is wrong for the ICC to try to go after the leaders of a democratic country fighting to defend their people from the threat of extermination. Because that is indeed what they say in the arrest warrant they issued for Mohammed Deif, who is dead, in fact, that on October 7th, Hamas committed the crime of extermination and has been threatening to do it again and again until Israel is destroyed.
Eylon, you mentioned, obviously you've made your point very clear about Gallant and Netanyahu, and you've mentioned Deif. So the ICC, they've also issued arrest warrants for Hamas's Mohammed Deif, and it's unknown whether he's dead or alive because the information has come from Israeli officials saying that he's dead. Do you agree with that decision that the ICC have made?
We think that Hamas's leaders should surrender. They should surrender, they should release the hostages, and then those leaders should face justice.
Do you agree?
It's outrageous.
Eylon, do you agree that
Yes.
the ICC have issued an arrest warrant for them? for him?
I don't know whether technically the ICC has jurisdiction, but we would want to see all surviving Hamas leaders tried for the war crimes of October 7th, including the Hamas leaders who currently have safe haven in Qatar. The United States should be demanding that they too be extradited to whatever court, to the United States in particular, to face justice for the crimes they committed through the sadistic slaughter of October 7th.
Eylon Levy, former spokesman for the State of Israel and host of the Israel State of Nation podcast. Thank you very much for coming onto the programme and talking to us.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. A Manhattan judge who's been presiding over the Donald Trump New York hush money trial has postponed next week's sentencing. With his other criminal trials on the brink of termination after his election triumph, the US president-elect has managed to largely evade repercussions from America's justice system and now has a chance to bend it in his favour as soon as he takes office. With a look at how Trump could reshape the rule of law, Benji Hire reports.
This became a familiar sight in 2024. Donald Trump facing dozens of charges in multiple indictments. He didn't win in the courtroom.
Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
But at the ballot box. And that victory is enough to consign his outstanding trials to the ash heap of history.
He could direct the Justice Department to drop the federal cases. He could potentially try to pardon himself. That hasn't been challenged yet in court. We don't know whether the president is allowed to pardon himself, but the pardon power is pretty broad, so I could imagine the Supreme Court saying he can. That would get rid of the prosecutions altogether.
The man Trump wanted to oversee this is Matt Gaetz, who stood by the ex-president during his many legal woes.
This is a made-up crime. No other American in the country would be charged with this type of crime. It's like the Mr. Potato Head doll of crimes, where they had to stick together a bunch of things that did not belong together. I'm just asking you.
But the former Florida congressman on Thursday pulled out of the race to head the very department that has investigated him for sex crimes that he denies committing. In his place, Trump's chosen veteran prosecutor Pam Bondi as the next attorney general. Another staunch defender of Trump, she would have the power and will to shut down his remaining criminal cases, including the one related to this. Supporters of Trump launched a deadly assault on the US Capitol on January 6, 2021, in an attempt to overturn the results of the previous election. Trump's role in inciting this mob was effectively nullified by a Supreme Court ruling which grants him presidential immunity, and the prosecution over his alleged involvement is also winding up in coming weeks, given a sitting president cannot face charges. It's forcing special counsel Jack Smith to finish his investigation sooner than intended in order to get ahead of Trump's promise to fire him within seconds of being sworn in. And it means Smith would leave without his cases actually seeing trial, the one dealing with election interference and Trump's alleged hoarding of classified documents, which was dismissed by a Trump-appointed judge in Florida this summer. But what about those convicted of partaking in the riot at the Capitol building and who are now in prison? Might the president-elect make good on his oft-repeated pledge to pardon them and the hundreds of defendants who still await trial? It is wholly up to Trump to decide. There are no constraints besides how it would look politically. On optics, Trump's stance is pretty clear. His first rally for the 2024 campaign opened with him saluting a choir of imprisoned insurrectionists singing the national anthem from behind bars. They could soon walk free, with their hero, a fellow convicted felon and twice impeached president, back in the White House. Benji Hire, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Let's have a look at some of the top business news. Clothing company Gap shares have risen today as the retail giant returns to growth ahead of the Christmas shopping season. The group's CEO, who took over last year, has pushed to improve the in-store experience and tap into new trends, and their annual net sales are expected to rise. The coronation of King Charles in 2023 cost British taxpayers £72 million, according to new government figures. It's the first coronation to take place in the UK since Queen Elizabeth II in 1953. The country's Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who were responsible for coordinating the event, said the celebration was a once-in-a-generation moment. Turning to sport now, and Manchester City Football Club have lost their battle against the Premier League over financial rules. The club had previously challenged the football body's decision to change associated party transaction rules to make them compliant with competition law. And Lewis Hamilton has topped both sessions in the first day of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, with championship favourite and current leader Max Verstappen 2 seconds off pace. McLaren's Lando Norris came second fastest behind Mercedes driver Hamilton. An Australian teenager has become the 6th foreign tourist to die in a suspected mass methanol poisoning in Laos. A growing list of countries warned of the potentially fatal consequences of drinking tainted alcohol in the Southeast Asian country. A British woman, another Australian teenager, an American and 2 Danes have also died in recent days following a spate of suspected poisonings in the popular backpacker destination of Vang Vieng, according to authorities. Laura Westbrook reports.
Holly Bowles was 19 and had been on life support in critical condition for several days in neighbouring Thailand after being evacuated from Laos following a night out, according to 7 News. Her friend Bianca Jones, also 19, died on Thursday. Bowles' family said in a statement on Friday, "It is with broken hearts and we are so sad to say that our beautiful girl Holly is now at peace." British lawyer Simone White, who's 28, from southeast London, was confirmed to have died on Thursday. An American man and 2 Danish women aged 19 and 20 have also died, though the specifics about the causes of death have not been released yet. New Zealand's foreign ministry said one of its citizens was sickened in Laos and was a possible victim of methanol poisoning. And the US State Department issued a warning to travelers to be on alert to the potential risk of methanol poisoning. Vang Vieng is a small town with a reputation for partying and is particularly popular with backpackers. The victims are believed to have consumed drinks tainted with methanol. This is sometimes added to mixed drinks at disreputable bars as a cheaper alternative to ethanol, but can cause severe poisoning or death. The Nana backpacker hostel where the Australian teenagers were staying has said it gave out free shots to around 100 guests the previous evening. The hostel's manager told the news agency Associated Press that no other guests had become unwell. The manager of the hostel has since been detained for questioning by police. Australia is pushing authorities to open up their investigation into the incident, which is also reported to have left another British woman in hospital. Laura Westbrook for Al Arabiya News, Hong Kong.
Let's have a reminder of today's top stories. Putin warns the West he could strike back against those who supplied weapons to Ukraine, while Zelenskyy says the world must respond. Meanwhile, the UK and France joined forces, pledging to relentlessly support Ukraine against Russia. In the United States, a New York judge officially postpones the hush money sentencing of Donald Trump in Manhattan. And a 6th foreign tourist and a 2nd Australian teenager dies of suspected methanol poisoning in Laos as hostel staff are questioned. That's all from us on W News. Thanks for joining us. Coming up next, Hadley Gamble's interview with the Iraqi president, and afterwards, Tom Burgess-Watson for GMT. Good night.